Hey everyone. So let's continue where we left off yesterday. If you remember yesterday, we had talked about elements of design. These are the individual components that make up a design. So for example, let's go through them real quick here. We talked about how points are a single dimensionless point in space, how lines can either be actually there or they can be implied by the negative shapes around them, and how they define volumes and boundaries. We talked about some different types of lines and what kinds of things those imply. And we had talked about color, and we talked about some of the bases of color. So, for example, like the hues, cool colors, and warm colors. We had talked about the value, which is how light and dark the color is applied. And we use that to give us some three-dimensionalness when we're sketching. We had talked about different types of shapes, whether they're geometric or mechanical or organic, like you might find in nature. And we had also talked about the general form, which is like how do you convey a three-dimensional shape, whether it's actually three-dimensional like these are, or whether you're just trying to do it on a 2D surface. We talked about positive and negative shapes and how texture, even though on a surface it might be the same surface, how you make it look like it has a different texture than others, and what kinds of things those surface textures might imply and what they might be used for. Today we're going to look at principles of design. Principles of design are basically how you can combine these individual elements of design and turn them into something. All right, so we've got 7 of them here that we're going to look at today. The first one is balance. Balance is basically how you lay out a design. Where are your points of emphasis? How big are they? How are they arranged? And let's look at some examples to see this. So the first type of balance is what's called a symmetrical balance. Now, some people call this a formal balance. In this situation, what you have is a line of symmetry. And in all of these objects here, with the line of symmetry runs vertically down the center of the image. And what you have is basically a mirror image on one side compared to the other side. Now, the mirror image may not be perfect. For example, I'm sure that this creepy fruit salad looking guy down here isn't perfectly symmetric. The trees in that topiary garden aren't going to have exactly the same number of leaves, but it's close enough that it looks symmetric, and that would give you a symmetrical balance. This is very clean. It looks very orderly and well arranged. Asymmetric balance means that we don't have like a line of symmetry. There's not a point where we can say everything on this side of the image is the same as that side of the image. But instead, what we have is the points of emphasis are arranged such that we don't have a particular part of the design that has all of the emphasis on it, while another part of the design is completely left on its own. So for example here, we've got a smaller object further away, and then we have a larger object closer to the center. So if we had put the large object far away, it would have drawn our eye away from the center here. Here we see Moscow, and you can see that we have a couple of different points of emphasis and how this picture is taken. We've got some on the right, we've got some on the left, and it kind of creates a sense of unity in the picture, even though that we don't have the exact same things repeated on both sides. Another way to do balance is to do what's called radial balance. Now, radial balance, whenever you hear the word radial, what you should think of is a circle. So a radial balance is based off a circular design. We have a center point, and things are arranged around that center point. So we have this little hubcap here. You see that the spokes of the hubcap are radially arranged around the center. We also have this view looking up at the ceiling of a cathedral, and you see the pillars and windows and artwork on the ceiling all are arranged around that point. All right. The next principle of design is emphasis. Emphasis is used to draw your attention to one particular point. Now, we can achieve this emphasis a couple of different ways, and they're listed here. You could have something that's a different size than everything else around it, and then it stands out because it's different. It could be placed in a point of emphasis. A point where your eyes would naturally look, often the middle of a design has a point of emphasis. The shape could be different. If you have a bunch of repeating rectilinear shapes and then you have a round or curved shape in it, its difference will naturally draw you there. And we can look at different contrast, light to dark, or colors, or things like that. Or even the use of lines can help to move your eye and direct it to a certain point. Here you see color as a point of emphasis. The red in the plastic around the seatbelt retaining clip is different and stands out from all the other colors in the area around it. So it's easier to find. This is a point where you'd use emphasis for a practical purpose to help you locate something. Contrast is another principle of design. This is a little bit different than emphasis in that we're not necessarily pointing out one particular thing. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use contrast to point out one particular thing, but contrast allows us to help separate things. All right, so obviously this has both emphasis and contrast. Here, notice we have contrast with the light and dark plants, the green, the red. You have the man-made pedestal in the middle. You have the natural things around it. You have water, you have land. You have a lot of different contrasting type of things. In the picture in the top right, we contrast color, we contrast types of lines, architectural styles. There's all sorts of contrast between these two buildings, which helps to separate them. All right, like we had said, you can use contrast as a point of emphasis. This conceptual drawing here has used color to help the people stand out and show specifically how the people would sit in this vehicle. Another principle of design is rhythm. Rhythm involves repetition. We have the same type of thing over and over again. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it has to be close enough that we associate all of those things together. The most obvious type of rhythm is what's called regular rhythm. This is the most repetitive type. So, for example, tiles or brickwork or these condominiums in Sweden, they all have the same shapes, the same lines, same colors, over and over again, almost like they're made with a stamp. Random rhythm is the repetition of these shapes, the similar shapes, but they don't have to be equally spaced. They don't have to be exactly the same. The Kremlin here in Moscow, you see the like onion bulb shaped tops on the individual towers. If you look at them, almost all of them are different in one way than another, but they have enough in common that you see the same type of general idea over and over again. So even though they're not arranged equally spaced from each other, they're not all the same size, they're not all in a line or anything like that, we still see a rhythm here, and it helps to tie the whole structure together. Gradiated rhythm involves a repetition with a change in size where we're maybe not even always size. It can be a change in one of the elements of design where we see a progression. So for example, all of these ones involve a change in size. Large rock to small rock, large Russian doll to the small Russian nesting doll, large pagoda to a small pagoda. But you could have a gradiated rhythm where you're gradually changing the color or the hue of something, or some other element of design could be gradually changed throughout a gradiated rhythm. All right. Here you can see that we have some gradiated rhythm as the individual background colored dots here. Obviously, they're all different. It's kind of a random rhythm even, but notice how they all lighten out towards the center of the image to provide some contrast for the person there. So we have both kind of a random rhythm and a gradiated rhythm going together here. Proportion, if you think about this, we talked about proportion earlier in the year. Proportion is the relative sizes of objects. How well do they match with the other things around them? And you can see some drawings here. You see the buildings in Washington, D.C., how we have not any particular buildings that are really like ridiculously larger or smaller than the others, how things kind of have a proportion to them. Unity is using the same types of elements over and over again. This is similar to pattern, except that we're not even repeating the same things, we're just repeating the same types of themes. Nice college campuses are a good place to see this. You have dozens of buildings. They're all different from each other, but you see unity patterns. For example, this college picture down at the corner here, we see similar brickwork, similar styles, but every one of these three buildings is distinct and fairly different from the others, but they have some consistent elements which help tie them together. Just like this garden up on the right, we have a lot of different types of trees and patterns in the walkways there, but there's enough similar that it ties the whole thing together and it looks like one object. The last principle of design that we're going to look at is called economy. Economy is basically the whole less is more idea. Let's cut out the extra stuff, things we don't need. If you would kind of look at the evolution of cell phones over the last couple decades, you can see this. Cell phones went from having lots of buttons and parts that folded up and slid out and extra keyboards and all that stuff, until now almost every smartphone looks about the same, where it's a rectangular piece with a screen on the front and just a solid shell on the back. Many of them don't even have buttons anymore. So we're reducing the number of elements in the design and simplifying it. Some designs this works really well for. Some designs, the ornateness and the detail of it is what really adds to the design. So we have to kind of think, what is our target here? Who would use this? What does it fit in with? What kind of elements of design do we want to emphasize? So economy, often, especially in modern design, is a good thing, but this isn't always what you want to go for. So we have to think about this before we do it. Here's some examples of economy in a modern concept car design. Notice taking away basically everything you don't need, right? Got rid of windshields and doors and everything. You just have the basics of what's required: a steering wheel, a couple of seats, and some wheels. Now, does it look cool? Yeah, but is this always what you want to do? Maybe not. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is looking at these. If you need to go back and take any notes on this, please make sure that you do. And we will have a project coming up where we're going to look at individual elements of design and say how they're used. So in specifics, what you're going to do is you're going to pick 3 objects. 2 of them need to be around you in your everyday life, in your home, things you see all the time. 1 of them, you can grab a random object off the internet. You're going to put these 3 pictures into a document and say what elements of design they have, and then how those are arranged using various principles of design. Look for another video detailing that assignment.